Hey guys, Jarretman here, back with another 500 Zoom video. Just playing two tables, picking up from the last video. I think I'm going to make this one just a little bit shorter this time. Again, I'm opening to 2.2 from every position in this video. It doesn't really make a big difference. Like, technically when you open for 2.2, you can open a slightly wider range. But just overall, it doesn't make that much of a difference. Ace-5 suited, obviously we're not folding. We can 4-bet some of the time, we can call some of the time, and we get a 4-bet. We're a tad bit deeper, so going for a larger 4-bet size would make some sense. The king 6 off just has absolutely nothing going for it on this board, and it's a board that overall favors the small blind in terms of the nutty portion as well as like the raw equity portion. As we would 3-bet 7s, 10s, queens at some frequency. Now we have a double gut shot and a high number. I'm gonna go for the small bet here, and we will include some flushes. Like, we'll check back some flush draws, of course, for the same reasons that we check back other hands, because it's a better board for him overall. Okay, I was thinking about cold calling here because he's actually isolating a shorter stacked weaker player, so I think his range is probably going to be a little bit tighter. And we have to fold if he jams, but I'm just overall playing this spot as a 4-bet or fold. And ace queen suited is going to make the 4-betting range because we're playing 4-bet or fold, so it means we're 4-betting linear. So 6-5-2 rainbow, he doesn't really have 5-6s or 2s, but he does have a lot of pairs. Okay, we get a 68. We're gonna check back. I think this spot here, even though we're the cold 4-better, I think we want to have a check back range and being in position. And I think he actually, if you like put this into something, I think he's doing pretty well. And that's a much better turn for him than it is for us, because we don't call 4 9s, 8s, or 7s where he can have all of those. So he just picked up a lot of equity with a huge portion of his range. And I'm just going to fold the ace queen suited there. It would be a pretty reasonable strategy if you just wanted to bet 1/4 with your range on the flop, but I like having some checkbacks. Get our low number, we'll go for the check on table 2. A board overall where we want to be betting with a larger size and more polar, at least from like a theory point of view. I do, however, think practically it is more difficult to play against the 1/3 sizing if you're the big blind. When you're playing against the very large sizing, it's kind of intuitive what you should be doing. Okay, yeah, we'll go for the overbet on table 2. He caps himself pretty hard on the flop when he checks back, not to mention that he is capped to begin with. Capped in the sense that he doesn't have aces, queens, jacks ever. Or ace queen, or like ace jack suited. So yeah, just a much better board for us at the nutty end. And therefore betting polar makes sense in my opinion. So jacks here, if you wanted to play this as a pure 4-bet, that'd be fine. Ooh, this is close. Oof. This is really close. So we're a bit deeper with the cold 4-better. He went to a very large size. Okay. I'm gonna make the fold. I think jacks is probably indifferent there. I think at 100 big blinds, it becomes less indifferent and probably leans towards shoving, given cutoff button small blind. Yeah, that one's close. It's a bit of a nitty fold, I'll be honest. With these positions, queen jack suited, we'll peel this some of the time, fold it some of the time. Okay, we get our low number. We'll make the fold. If he opened cutoff or button, I think we would continue that pure. And even versus hijack, we should continue it some percentage of the time, I think. If we know that our opponent is playing a bet his range for 1/3, like bet 100% of his range for 1/3, then I think we will continue this pure, either as a check raise or a check call. But I know Jimmy is playing a relatively balanced check back range. So I think it becomes less attractive to call these very, marginal 0 EV hands. Interesting board table 1 where we have a 2x advantage, but he has everything else advantage. So we have an advantage at the upper, and every other part of his range versus every other part of my range is doing better. So all things considered, pretty decent board. Pretty decent board for the big blind here. Considering how the way that the ranges are structured, big blind versus under the gun, he's not going to have like 2 6s full frequency. He's not even going to have 8s full frequency. So it just becomes, again, like one of those blank boards, or more so like one of those blank boards. And anytime it's like a blank board, the guy with the polarized range does a lot better. And we can bet 1/3, we can check. I think overall it's a pretty high frequency checking spot for the big blind. Because if we are developing a checking range on the flop, the hands that we want to check on the flop are usually going to be like our stronger ace highs. Like ace king, no heart might want to check a lot. Okay. We get an 87, so we'll go for the 1/3 bet. This spot, potentially, I could be perceived to be under bluffing this spot, which is why I chose the small size. Because we need to show up on the river with like our suited Broadway hands, and those suited Broadway hands would be like, like Jack 10 suited, Queen Jack suited, King Jack suited, those types of hands, King Jacks, King Queen suited, that 3-bet pre-flop. The problem is that if you perceive people to not be 3-betting those Broadway hands a lot pre-flop, then potentially they could be under bluffing by the river. I don't know if I have to peel the 4-5 off here on the flop versus the half pot bet. Blind versus blind. I don't think so. I think I can fold. Like the board just doesn't run out like a 3 and then an ace enough for the time to justify floating with such a bad low equity hand, I think. Cutoff versus small blind on this board, I prefer using a very polarized betting strategy on the flop, and I don't think King 10 makes it into the betting range very often. So in these spots for the small blinds, he has to be a little bit creative with his bluffs. Like he has some obvious bluffs, like 10x, like maybe 10-9 suited. But then what are the rest of his bluffs? Like he has to choose from his low pocket pairs, I think, or maybe other suited connectors like no equity connectors. And versus this size, I think I'm just getting milked, but it doesn't matter. Gonna call. Yeah, getting milked. This is close table 1. It might be a pure continue, theory-wise. I'm gonna make the fold. I'm gonna make the fold versus that player. Not liking it though. Not liking it one bit. The king jack off there could continue as a check raise even. Queen 9 suited will mix in some 3-bets here. Okay, we gotta fold this time. You could even call versus the min raise, being on the button. But I don't think we want to be calling it all the time. I was going to 3-bet at 25%, call at 25%. King 10 off, you might see some sims that incorporate this as a 3-bet bluff some of the time. And if there was no rake, we would be likely flatting it a lot, but yeah, I'll just make the fold. If you're playing the button as a 3-better fold, then in general you're playing an overall tighter range, and king 10 off does not make the threshold if that is a strategy that you were going to use, which I think is a very, very reasonable strategy considering how often you get squeezed from the blinds when the cutoff opens button flats. The real way to counteract that, or to make sure that you capture your fair share of EV when you're playing a flatting strategy from the button versus the cutoff, is to make sure you study which hands you should be calling versus the squeeze on the button. Because even though you're capped with the condensed range, you're in position, you're in absolute position, and you just have some hands that can continue and some hands that can't continue facing the 3-bet, and it's going to be tough to navigate a lot of flops, and you're going to be over folding potentially even on a lot of flops, but that's okay because you're getting a discounted price to enter the pot. And yeah, you just have to, you know, if you're really worried about that spot, then study up on what you should be doing after you get squeezed. Spoiler alert, you'll be overcalling much more often than you think. I think you'd be surprised how often you end up calling versus the squeeze. This is close with the 10-9 off here on table 1. I think I'm going to make the fold. Given that the board is double draw, we only have 2 outs to the... Sorry, we only have 4 outs to the pure nuts. And 2 of those outs aren't even the pure nuts, so we only have 2 outs to the pure nuts. Now the king, we're reversed versus ace-10. We're a little bit deeper, but I'm pretty sure 10s is still just a jam here. If we were like 170 big blinds deep, then I'm like, I don't want to jam 10s. But yeah, 10s is just going to be a pure jam for me in these positions. The cold 4-betting range of the big blind versus the button open small blind 3-bet is still pretty wide. Very wide, actually. It just becomes less attractive to jam if we were like 170 big blinds effective, because we're just risking so much to win so little comparatively when we're like 100 big blinds. And I think our exact stack, which was like what, 135-ish big blinds, our exact stack is on the borderline where it's like, do we really want to be jamming 10s? Do we want to be incorporating some calls with 10s? Like, it's close. Estoy Gorduk is an aggressive player. And again, he'll have cold 4-bets that are worse than 10s, and he'll have some hands that are just going to have to fold versus the jam, which is a pretty good result with 10s. You know, it can be kind of counterintuitive if you're used to the more old school way of thinking about poker, in the sense that this is not a 3-bet normally, but I think it's fine here. if you're used to the more traditional way of thinking, you're like, okay, if I jam with tens, I'm only getting called by better or like ace king, so I'm not in a good spot. However, it's okay to want him to fold. It's okay that we want him to fold because we're out of position and we're gonna under realize our equity when we play a pot post flop. And if that's the case, because we're out of position, it's fine to jam with tens, even though when we get called, we're not liking the spot. We're likely behind or flipping when we get called. Because like nines is a very small percentage 4-bet from the big blind. It might even just be a pure fold. And if that's the case, then he never has an under pair that takes this line that calls us. So it's like, is tens a bluff here in this spot then? Because we want him to fold. We perform better when he folds. We win more money when he folds. I guess you could consider tens a bluff, couldn't you? Not gonna lie, I'm not a big fan of using the overbet sizing on this board, even though you will see that the solver might incorporate the overbet sizing on this board because it makes sense to do so in a theory way. Like, if you think about the structure of the board and the structure of his range versus the big blind's range, or my range in this case, he has jacks tens pure, which we don't. We lose jack 10 suited because we would 3-bet it. We have jack 5 suited, but he also has jack 5 suited. We have 10-5 suited. He might have 10-5 suited, but we don't have like an offsuit 2-pair advantage. So just also his, like, he has the overpair advantage, the Broadway advantage, because our range gets diluted from what we 3-bet. He even has like the straight draw advantage because we would 3-bet like 9-8 suited, you know, queen 9 suited some of the time, king queen suited, king queen off we would 3-bet some of the time. So just in every sense of the word, he has an advantage on this board. However, all that being said, I think it's pretty easy to play against the overbet in this spot. Like, we just fold a lot. It's just okay, next hand, you know. A nice answer. You win the pot. You win the 5 big blinds or $5, whatever it would be. When you use a small betting strategy here, I feel like it's much more difficult to play against when you're the big blind. Like, there's different ways that you can take advantage of the fact that this board is much better for your range than it is for your opponents. But yeah, it makes sense. In GTO land, you gain some EV by including like these very big bets. So if that's something you think is worth it for your game, then include it. It's yeah, I won't say much more about that because we're just talking about preference and exploitative stuff. But GTO wise, yeah, it makes sense. He put the large size. We do have a hand that could consider check raising. I'm gonna go for the small check raise. I don't know if this size is much of a thing, to be honest. Like, this might be this might be me just choosing bad sizings, considering our range. But for our exact hand, I really like that sizing. I like that sizing because it accomplishes exactly what we want it to do with this hand, which is to fold over cards, which have 6 outs, to a hand that won't fold. Like, even if we fold a hand like Jack 10 offsuit, that would be fantastic with our hand. And now we're in a weird spot, for sure. We're in a spot where I don't know what I'm doing, but this hand seems like a very intuitive check call on the turn. I'm having trouble finding hands that are worse than ours that take this line. And now on the river, I'm just sitting here, I'm thinking, like, I have a lot of 7x, don't I? He doesn't have many 7x. Like, he doesn't want to reopen the action. We're going to go for the donk bluff. He doesn't have any 7x that wants to bet the turn that's not already, like, a straight, like, 7-8. Because when he reopens the turn for that small sizing, you know, we get to check raise him still sometimes. I'm very curious to see what he had. I'm going to guess, actually, that he had a set. That's my guess, but could be wrong. Maybe he had like an overpair or 2-pair or something. Because maybe a set would bet bigger on the turn. I'm very, very, very curious to see what he had. Yeah, he did have a set. Okay. We played that hand pretty weird. I think my flop play is maybe a little bit spew, but I don't mind it. Spew in the sense that maybe that sizing doesn't get chosen. Yeah, doesn't get chosen. I'm also expecting this board, when it gets bet for the large size, like that 75% pot sizing, I'm expecting it on average to be a little bit unbalanced, maybe, in the sense that it's not being bluffed enough with like these air hands. And if it's not being bluffed enough with these 2 over air hands for that size, then our little check raise for protection doesn't make much sense, because he just doesn't have those hands that can now fold, and we just isolate ourselves. And not to mention, we give him the opportunity to 3-bet the flop, even though that might not be a thing GTO wise. Like 3-betting this flop probably doesn't happen very much as the button, but real people might go for the flop 3-bet, and then we're in a very ugly spot with 6-7. So yeah, I don't know what to do here, and that's fine. If I always knew what to do, then I wouldn't have any enjoyment from poker, would I? Okay, I'm gonna wrap this video up. We'll play this hand, and we'll see what we get here, and we'll play this hand. Fold, Jimmy, fold. We roll a relatively high number, and we will go for the bet here. It is a board that we want to have a check back range, I think, GTO wise. The way I'm going to be playing this board is betting 1/3 or checking back. You know, if I think a player potentially isn't playing aggressively enough versus the 1/3, you could consider betting your range, but overall, I think you gain significant EV by having a check back range there. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next video.